as we start to get on board. Yeah, hi everyone. As I mentioned just before, we'll just give the participants a few more seconds to get in. I'm watching sort of like the numbers increasingly come up into the room, so we'll just let that stabilize a little bit before we kick off the webinar. There's been over 1,300 people sign up for this webinar today, so it's we're expecting big things. Oh, sorry, I've just realized I have no sound. So here I am welcoming everyone. So let me start that again. Are we good now? See, it was just a test. So thank you very much for joining the Global Wind Energy Council's webinar for the launch of the Global Offshore Wind Report 2021. We've got a great program lined up for you today. We're going to hear first from Ben Backwell, the CEO of the Global Wind Energy Council. We'll also be hearing from the CEO of the Offshore Business Unit for Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, Mr. Mark Becker. We'll then get into a presentation from Feng Zhao, who's done all of the hard work in collating the report, before doing a deep dive into a panel presentation or a panel discussion, where we'll be joined by Joyce Lee, from the Head of Policy for the Global Wind Energy Council, Aaron Smith, the CCO for Principal Power, Lohit Shringi from the Global Business Manager for DuPont, and Mark Becker again will be joining the panel discussion. So without further ado, I just need to clear up some housekeeping matters. So we really want you guys to be able to participate in this webinar. And the best way to do that is by sending your questions or submitting questions into the Q&A function. And here you can see that if you drag your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, you'll have this menu pop up and you'll be able to see the Q&A button. So just submit your questions in there and we will endeavour to get to those, and we'll try to direct them to the relevant panelists. And we'll keep that as a fairly lively session towards the end of the panel discussion. The next slide, please, Sophia. So on all of the slides that you'll see, there's an opportunity for you to download the report. So if you haven't already downloaded the report, please make sure to do so. And you can scan the QR code, which will take you, like on the screen, which will take you to a direct link of how to download the report. But without any further ado, I would like to present the opening remarks from Ben Backwell, CEO of Global Wind Energy Council, and Mark Becker, CEO of Offshore Wind Unit in Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy. Take it away, Ben and Mark.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Backwell, and I'm the CEO of DWeck. Welcome to the launch of this 2021 edition of DWeck's Global Offshore Wind Report. It's great to see so many of you joining from around the world. The report comes at a really pivotal moment for what is both one of the fastest growing industries in the world and one of the key available technologies for rapidly decarbonizing the world's energy system. Before I say a few words about the content of the report, I wanted to extend my congratulations and gratitude to the lead authors, Joyce Lee and Feng Zhao, to Alistair Dutton, the chair of the Global Offshore Wind Task Force, and to the whole DWeck team of staff and advisors that contributed to the report, along with our member associations and industry partners, which supplied us with data and insight and feedback on the report. I also want to extend my heartfelt thank you to our sponsors, Siemens Gamesa, whose offshore CEO, Mark Becker, has written an insightful foreword to this report, Principal Power, DuPont Nomex, Bureau Veritas, CRU, Harting, Iberdrola, and Leosphere. Now, the offshore wind sector continues to grow steadily. The industry installed 6.1 gigawatts of capacity in 2020, down slightly from 6.24 gigawatts in 2019. And DWeck expects a new record year for the 2021 figures, as China's offshore wind sector rushes to install 7.5 gigawatts ahead of the expiry of current feed-in tariffs. Now, the report forecasts that 235 gigawatts of new offshore wind capacity will be installed over the next decade under current policies. The new capacity is nearly 7 times the current market size and is a 15% increase compared to our previous year's forecast. Now, the 35 gigawatts of offshore wind installed today already helps the world avoid 62.5 million tons of CO2 emissions, equivalent to taking 20 million cars off the road, and it provides around 700,000 jobs. But our industry needs to grow much faster to meet the expectations and targets set by international energy bodies such as the IEA and IRENA, both of which foresee offshore wind capacity growing to over 2 terawatts by 2050 in order to help us to reach net zero. According to the data in the report, the world has so far installed only 2% of the offshore wind power capacity needed to achieve these net zero targets. While some countries around the world have already put in place comprehensive offshore wind targets and strategies, the report finds that altogether these targets only account for 560 gigawatts. And that's a long way from the 2 terawatts that the world needs. Across the world, serious and decisive action needs to be taken by governments to streamline and de-risk permitting and planning processes, speed up auctioning, and build robust power markets which are designed for the energy transition. In many cases, this means improving existing systems and regulatory environments, but in others, it means building almost from scratch in a way that won't require decades to mature, decades that we can no longer afford. And what gives me continued hope and confidence is that ahead of the COP26 talks in Glasgow this year, there is an unprecedented interest and appetite to adopt offshore wind among governments and policymakers around the world, from East Asia to the Black Sea, to the Mediterranean, to the South Atlantic and beyond. This is truly the moment for our industry to step up and engage with policymakers, investors and communities to quickly transfer knowledge and valuable experience from successful markets and projects around the world. And over the coming months, DWeck and its partners will be announcing a series of initiatives and programs to make sure that this happens. We need to work together and seize this favorable moment so that we can fulfill our responsibilities and contribute to a rapid transition to clean energy, with offshore wind at its very center. We hope this report can help to inform and inspire these efforts.
Hi everyone. On behalf of DWeck, I would like to welcome you to today's launch event for the DWeck Offshore Wind Report 2021. Before I come to the market, let me start with safety. Safety in the industry is of utmost importance to me, and I've mentioned it in a social media post in the last weeks, that actually with respect to safety, I don't care where in the industry you work, but I care about that everybody in the industry comes home safely each and every evening. Hence, if you know something which is not safe, say it. If you see something which is not safe, please intervene. And if you think something is not safe, please raise it, and then we together explore how we can stop it. This report includes a lot of outstanding highlights in the industry and exceptional insights. I joined the industry in 2010, and I'm always impressed by the breathtaking speed of development since then. And this year, more than ever, again highlighted that offshore wind is not just only a cool industry, but we also serve a bigger purpose, because you've seen the extreme weather events in this year, you've seen the floods on all continents, the fires, and the extreme heat. I know that a lot of you share that passion for the bigger purpose that the offshore wind industry also serves, and hence I know about your genuine passion to realize the forecasted 270 gigawatt of installed capacity in offshore wind by 2030. Looking at the 35 gigawatt of installed base that we currently have, it becomes clear that this will be a very demanding but also very rewarding journey. It is a high number, but I think it's an attainable and reasonable number. Looking at the yearly installation, that underlines also how demanding the journey will be, because we're talking about 6.1 gigawatt of offshore wind installed so far per annum, and we're talking about 20 gigawatt and more to be installed from 2026 onwards. But again, with focus on safety, cost, technology, and also reasonable policies, that is feasible. Also, the report highlights that offshore floating wind is moving out of the niche in great speed. The target or the forecasted installation volume for floating wind has been raised from 6.5 gigawatt to 16.5 gigawatt. And if you add on top of that the current discussions about hydrogen, it is clear that only the sky is the limit for offshore wind. Count on Siemens, Gamesa, DWeck, and its partners to work on even more challenging targets and reasonable policies. We are all working together to unlock the potential of offshore wind worldwide. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much, Ben. And so without further ado, I would like to hand the floor to Feng Zhao, who is the Head of Strategy and Market Intelligence at the Global Wind Energy Council. And Feng will take you through some of the takeaways from the Global Wind Report. And just before you start, Feng, I can see that in the chat, some people are saying that they're having trouble downloading the report. I think it's a question of that there's lots of traffic going to that site at the moment. So please bear with us and you'll have opportunities to download the report throughout the webinar. Thanks very much, Feng. Over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Hi, good morning, Europe. Good afternoon, Asia Pacific. Really early morning in Brazil and United States. And my name is Feng Zhao. I'm the head of strategy and marketing intelligence. I'm also one of the key authors for this report. And as you can see from the screen, this report, 2021, it's the third global offshore wind report released by Global Wind Energy Council. Compared with previous year report, I just want to highlight there's slightly different. Business as usual, we cover market status, market outlook, and emerging market, floating wind technology. But this year, follow the main topics. We start in March. This is a big topic as well in our global wind report released in March, where we're talking about the role of wind power on the road to net zero. And again, continue the journey. In this report, we further highlight offshore wind's role in the road to net zero to support the journey. And we had a close look in this chapter called Taking Offshore Global. In this section, we talk about the challenges and also bring the proposal to the industry and also the politician about how to target the challenge in order to prove the road for the industry to grow. and we cover support scheme and the transition from government regulated price into auction. We covered permitting, grid transmission, and also we have the offshore financing, cover the classic financial model and innovative financial model. And we have also covered maritime spatial planning, and also last but not at least, that's the workforce and safety, as Mark just clearly mentioned. We expect the industry to grow. We're happy for that, but we have to make sure that we're going to move this forward in a sustainable way and in a really safety secured way. Now let's take a look the key findings. Next slide will show the market status in 2020. The chart, next slide, just indicate where we are today. And looking at the new installation in 2020, as we already indicate from our global wind report in March. And last year, it's quite significant, even though it's slightly lower than the previous year, 2019. But we got bear this in mind that 2020, we had a fantastic, not fantastic, we had a really big challenge in terms of disruption due to the COVID-19 reported by DWeck through different channels. OEM suppliers, developer facing the disruption in terms of supply chain and also turbine production. 6.1 gigawatt, that's the grid connect capacity globally for 2020. One takeaway I want to highlight here is that based on the numbers we got from our partner in China, if we are only looking at the new installation, which means we are only looking at the turbine installation without taking into account if the turbine has been grid connected. In China, actually, nearly 4 gigawatt has been installed in 2020. If that's the case, actually, we are far more than 6.1. So again, the message is clear. China absolutely play a significant role in terms of new installation in 2020. Now let's take a look the market outlook. That's a key message we try to deliver from this report. Next slide. So business as usual, we offer 10 years market outlook instead of 5. 5, that's a standard for both onshore offshore in our global wind report. But for offshore, due to relatively long lead time and also the time need to spend in terms of financing, etc., project execution. So we do have the ability to cover all the global offshore pipeline in-house. So this year's new outlook, if we compare with previous year, our CEO Ben already highlighted some key findings from this year's report. It is true, compared with the 2030 outlook, DWeck released last summer, and we increased 15% of the total new installation for the next 10 years. The reason is simply simple. If we follow the industry daily base, you will see the business dynamics reported everywhere throughout the different continents, not just Europe, China, Japan, South Korea. And most recently, you even hear new reported numbers delivered by our partner, for example, World Bank. We did a lot of works and trying to bring the potential and explore the possibility in really new market, even in the Black Sea or Philippines or Turkey, Costa Rica or Colombia, Brazil. Again, I think what has been going on in the industry in the past 12 months already justify the reasons why we increase our forecast. Looking at the growth, where you can see right now, we see it is possible in terms of new installation. By 2025, we're going to pass the milestone of 20 gigawatt. And this will probably be doubled by 2030, close to 40 gigawatt will be installed on 2030. That's based on our new numbers. Looking at where the new capacity will be built in the next 10 years, the chart already tells the story. So in the near term, we will see a little bumper up and down. That's mainly due to the slowdown expected in the world's largest market in China due to the phase out the central government support. But for the next 2-3 years, where you can see still the majority of the installation will come from Europe and Asia. But new capacity will be built from other regions. The next slide will clearly tell you where those capacity will come from. Next slide, please. Next slide. So looking at the regional breakout, the two bar chart here, pie chart indicate Europe and Asia will continue to play the key role in terms of new additions. And together, the two regions will make up nearly 85% of the new installation in the next 10 years. But we also see the change. Are we going to stay on the same track for the next 10 years? No, the data indicates that actually start from 2004, we're going to see more capacity to be built in emerging market in Southeast Asia, including Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, and also in North America, that's United States. I want to highlight here, looking at the bar chart, where you can see, based on our data, on 2025, the rule for Europe and China are going to come down to 81.5%. And by the end of this decade, their market share for the combined regions, that's Europe and China, that's are going to drop to 72%. In United States, for example, I think a lot of good progress has been made since Biden took over the White House. And in May, we have the first utility scale project has been approved by Boeing. And looking at the regional or state level, the target has been increased compared with a year ago. If you aggregate all the target from more than 10 states around the East Coast and also West Coast at this moment in South California, you come up nearly 40 gigawatt in the pipeline. And based on the project pipeline at DWeck Market Intelligence, there are 18 projects which already won the auction or announced the commission date. That's give us more than 15 gigawatt to be built in the next 5 years. So again, the trend is clear. We are going to see emerging market playing an increasingly bigger role start from 2024. Next slide. Let's take a look. Floating wind. The previous slides already indicate, we are going to continue the double-digit growth for the global wind market in the next decade. If we are looking floating, it's more exciting. Take a look at the CAGR, the compound average growth rate. It's, for example, in the next 5 years, more than 100%. And for the second half of the next decade, where you still have nearly 60% of growth rate. Maybe you are thought about why DWeck increased the market outlook significantly. It is true. A year ago, we only predict 6.5 gigawatt floating to be built in the next 10 years. But today, the new data indicate 16.5, 10 gigawatt extra. I think if you follow the industry, this also will be simply justified. In the past 12 months, countries across the global announced the target for floating. That's something we don't see a year ago. Follow the target announced by market like the UK, also most recently Spain, France, Norway, and also across the global, you will see South Korea, for example. The president announced a 6 gigawatt floating plan by 2030, and Japan already launched the first floating auctions, and the winners has been announced. More are in the pipeline, and also China installed the first floating turbine a month ago, and Taiwan, if you're looking at the upcoming phase 3 auctions, European and the local developers, they have floating project in the pipeline as well. So once again, I think floating, that's quite interesting market. In the report, we did highlight that actually looking at the offshore wind potential in total, and 80% of the potential actually is further offshore. And fixed bottom solution is no longer feasible. So therefore, floating is the future. And we're going to see, even though right now we're still at the pre-commercial stage, but we believe that the industrialization are going to be reached by the end of this decade. And from the bar chart, you can see the market is going to pass the milestone of 1 gigawatt from 2026. By the end of this decade, we believe that South Korea, Japan, Norway, France, and the UK probably will be the top 5 floating market in terms of total installation. If this is going to be true or not, let's see, time will tell. Maybe in 2 years or maybe next year, we're going to increase further our market outlook. Let's see. Now let's take a look at the next section. Next slide. That's the key topics we're going to, as I said, that's the key topics we focus. That's the conversation we already started earlier this year. Even though based on the current policy, DWeck already predict a fantastic growth rate. As both Ben and Mark already mentioned, the market are going to go 6 or 7 folders increase compared with where we are by the end of last year. But the double-digit growth rate is enough to help the industry, offshore wind, to help the global industry and the local government or society to reach the net zero target. The new numbers released by IRENA earlier this year indicate to reach the net zero in the middle of next by 2050. The total capacity from offshore wind need to reach 2 terawatt. Where we are today, 0.03.5 terawatt. So we need to grow by about 57 folders. And looking at the annual growth rate, we said, okay, 6.3, that's the global record so far. But according to the recommendation from IRENA, the new installation by 2030 need to go up to 80 gigawatt. So there's more than 10 folders potential growth. The global map we have here, we have different color code. The green one, that's the forecast provided by DWeck. Let's just follow the numbers, including this report. And the third bar chart, the purple indicates the regional target. For example, in Europe, we have 300 target, part of this Green Deal. And in Asia, we aggregate the numbers from different market. Again, even though we say market outlook fantastic, but to reach the target, we are far behind the schedule. Again, to reach the net zero, I think we have to working closely with the politicians, streamline the project pipeline, permitting, etc. And by the end of by 2050, we believe that based on the DWeck preliminary data, we believe Asia are going to be the largest regional market, followed up by Europe, North America, South America, Pacific region, and Africa. My last slide, that will focus on float, focus on the technology. Regarding the net zero rules, and we will going to hear more from the panel discussion. Now, looking at the technology innovation, I think we have so many things going on. It's really hard when I get, to know how many minutes I can have to deliver the key findings. I just feel there's no way to cover all this fantastic progress made in the past 12 months. Looking at the technology innovation, it is absolutely a true enabler in terms of LCOE, cost reduction, and we have to rely on the technology innovation to reach the net zero energy transition. For example, looking at the turbine technology, follow the 15 megawatt turbine release, medium speed turbine released by Vestas in Q1. The Chinese Mingyang released the even bigger turbine, 16 megawatt. Those 10 megawatt plus turbine offered by GE Renewable, Siemens Gamesa, Vestas, Mingyang are going to be commercially available start from 2023 or 2024. So the reason is simple. We need big turbine to increase the AEP, reduce the cost of CapEx and OpEx, etc. Again, this is not just the entire reason. This is just part of the category. And looking at the floating, as I said, my previous slides indicated fantastic growth outlook, but this is mainly based on government target, and also part of this reason is technology innovation from floating section. Not just the different floaters, we have more than 40 different floaters ongoing in different parts of the world. We still see new floater design come out from Japan and South Korea. And looking at the floating itself, it's not just the floating to support the single turbine. We have the multi-floaters, we have the integrated solution, we have the hybrid solution, combine wind, solar, hydrogen, wave, etc. So you can see floating section. In this business sector, they are not really just thinking about energy generation. They are also thinking about how to help this hard to electrify industry to reach the energy transition. Power to X, that's the third year we target this topic, and it's become really international topic. You saw news about Power to X happens around everywhere. In this report, we cover gigawatt level hydrogen project, Power to X project in Europe, and also across the global to South Korea, Japan, China as well. And the last, but at least I want to highlight in terms of technology strength, that's the supply chain ecosystem. And we all rely on the technology to support the circular economy. We need to get a lot of turbine built reaching the target. Again, we have to make sure that we have the recyclable supply chain, we have the green supply chain. So to get there, we need to get suppliers like DuPont, our sponsor, on board to provide a technology solution. I'm glad to see that our leading sponsor is GRE just released, the first 100% recyclable blades. I think that's absolutely needed. That's the future. To reach the target, we have to think about the entire green supply chain. All in all, it's a fantastic year in the past 12 months. I think as the key authors and on behalf of DWeck, we are really, really happy to see the progress has been made. I'm going to stop here now. If you want to know more information, you're welcome to download the report. Now I'm going to hand over to Stuart, and I'm looking forward to hear and listen to the insight from the panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Feng, for that comprehensive run through of the report. And it's my absolute pleasure now to introduce our panelists. I'll introduce them one by one. Ms. Joyce Lee, the Head of Policy and Project at the Global Wind Energy Commission Renewable Energy, and we met Mark a little bit earlier. Mr. Aaron Smith, CCO from Principal Power, and Mr. Lohit Shringi, the Global Business Manager at DuPont. Welcome to the stage, everybody. And so let me kick it off by taking a look back, and this is an opportunity for you guys also to talk a little bit about the organizations that you represent. But if the best predictor of future behavior or future action is past behavior, what can we suppose from the last year? And offshore wind continues to be resilient despite COVID. And I'd like each panelist to give their takeaway, like their one single takeaway for what happened last year that sort of caught your eye and that kind of augurs well for the future. Joyce, if you can kick off.
Sure, thanks, Stuart. I think it's really hard to pick one big takeaway from a 140-page report, but I will be a bit cheeky and pick two, if that's fine. So I think from a market growth lens, Feng said it best. Last year, we saw the second best year for offshore wind. I think more exciting is that we saw offshore wind start to diversify its market coverage. So we did see installations in mainland China and the UK, places in Europe like Belgium and the Netherlands, but then we also saw it move to new shores like the US and South Korea, and that's something we're going to continue to see, that diversification, particularly in Asia, in places like Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and then Vietnam in the coming years. And then my second one would be around technological breakthroughs, and I think Feng also mentioned a few of these. I think we've seen incredible turbine innovation, a series of large turbine announcements up to last month that have come out over the last year. We've seen a lot of those suitable for high wind conditions and typhoon-prone areas, which again is important as offshore wind continues to expand. And then we saw incredible capacity factors logged in the sector. If you look at the average factors at Hywind floating farm in Scotland, for instance, they had around 57% to the year ending March 2021. And I'm sure we'll discuss the opportunities around floating later. But I think those two things, market diversification and continued innovation, are going to be big predictors for where the sector goes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Joyce. I'll hand the floor now to Mr. Mark Becker. And Mark, first of all, congratulations on the opening of Korea's Flack Wind Park here earlier this week, Scandinavia's largest one. Congratulations on that, despite COVID. So what's your biggest takeaway from this year?
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned the resilience to COVID, so I'll not mention this. I'd like to mention one thing which is not connected to technology and might be a little bit surprising, but I mean, we have all learned and seen in the COVID times that it doesn't matter where you are actually sitting when you work. That sounds like a no-brainer, but still it was an eye-opener during that whole phase. Yeah? And this offers a great opportunity for us as an industry because we can tap into complete new pools of talents because they don't need to sit next to our Denmark office, not necessarily next to the Hamburg office. They can sit everywhere, and that is really, and we have seen this, and we've explored that road. That's a key insight for me, in particular, from the last year. Besides the resilience in the installation, which makes projects like Kriegers Flak feasible, but the talent pool has opened, and that's cool. We need that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so I'll hand over to Aaron Smith now, with Principal Power being one of the, if not the leading floating wind company. What's your biggest takeaway from last year, Aaron?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just a few words about Principal Power. For those that don't know us, we're a technology and engineering services provider that's commercialized the wind float technology. This is a 3-column semi-submersible foundation for offshore wind turbines. And we do have 75 megawatts operating now in Portugal and Scotland. So I think that does make us the market leader, which is very nice. We got a limited time in the session, so if you guys want to learn more about us, we just released a new website at principalpower.com. I think I have kind of two takeaways as well, because with the COVID environment, I really want to highlight the incredible perseverance of personnel in this industry. Yes, you had the remote people that were able to do their jobs remotely. I was one of them for the most part, but we also had a lot of people that were out on the sites working in an incredibly challenging environment to deliver 2 floating wind projects. That required an enormous amount of commitment and sacrifice on a personal basis. And I think, you know, just seeing that was really humbling. And I think it shows how bright the future is for this industry. I also think that 2020 will be remembered as kind of the start of the decade of floating wind. We achieved the commercial commissioning of the 25 megawatt wind float Atlantic project in Portugal. And we think that policymakers are really seeing the combination of technology readiness with the cost reductions that have been achieved in the fixed bottom space. And it's kind of captured their imagination. So what we saw in 2020 was that governments in Europe, the US, and Asia really started to announce these multi-gigawatt floating wind targets, providing a path to market for large scale developments, which is really important for cost reduction. And we also saw major investors across the board announce that floating wind was going to be an important part of their energy transition goals. And that has created an enormous amount of momentum and probably accounts for why I look so tired. I think as a result here, you know, just highlighting Feng's statistics and projection, delivering 16.5 gigawatts of floating offshore wind, as the DWeck report predicts here, is a massive challenge. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think that really shows how bright the future is.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Aaron. Now I take it over to Lohit Shungi from DuPont. Lohit, what's DuPont doing in offshore wind, and what was your biggest takeaway from last year?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Stuart, for inviting, first of all, for inviting us to this very good launch and the panel discussion. So thank you. For people who don't know DuPont, we are basically a material science company, and we have been developing and inventing materials which have, I would say, changed the course of course of history many times over. Like we invented nylon, polyester, Teflon, Nomex, Kevlar, and many other materials. So we are into material science space. And like, two words come to my mind when I look back, and when we rather as a company look back. One is the resilience, and second is agility. Now, resilience, I think you have talked about resilience. Mark also talked about resilience a little bit, but the very fact that the markets and the overall commitment towards action for the climate change, despite the challenges, despite the constraints, I think that commitment has only grown, and that to us really shows the amount of resilience which is there in the markets and the companies which are available in this market. Also, like the amount of technology advancement which has happened in last 18 months, incredible, and also displays the amount of resilience which is going under all the efforts which is happening. And of course, the agility, in the last 18 months, we have seen and we continue to see a lot of uncertainty, the uncertainty around supply chains, uncertainty around logistics, and so on and so forth. But I think we have learned a lot how to respond to these uncertainties. And the industry as a whole, and we as a material supplier, we have learned how to respond to these uncertainties. And that agile mindset has really started to set in. And I think that is important, because if we take that agile mindset in the future, especially in this industry, which is so rapidly changing, that will build a fundamental core strength of the industry. And that's what we are doing. And you asked us what we are doing. So we are innovating. We're trying to keep ourselves flexible, and we're trying to develop products and programs which can meet the emerging needs, not only the existing needs, but also the emerging needs of the industry. So we are very excited about the future of this industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lohit. So now we'll look to the future. And Joyce, DWeck is leading the global wind energies push at COP and the of COP26 this year. And I guess that it's the race to net zero. So what's Offshore's role in the race to net zero, and what's the key to unleashing the potential of offshore wind in this race?
Sure, that's a really good question, Stuart. And as Fung noted, we're forecasting around 235 gigawatts new installations to 2030, and we're seeing fantastic growth, annual installations going from 6 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts by the middle of the decade, and then doubling by the end of the decade to around 40 gigawatts per year. If someone asked you if they should invest their time and their money in a market that's going to grow by 7 times in 10 years, you'd be hard pressed to argue. But to be clear, that growth is not enough to meet our global net zero targets. The IEA published a roadmap to net zero by 2050 that was commissioned by the COP26 presidency. And this showed that installations for offshore wind need to scale up not to 40 gigawatts, but to 80 gigawatts by 2030 to stay on a net zero pathway. Similarly, IRENA has published its roadmap to net zero emissions, and this shows we need 380 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And we're only on track to fulfill about 70% of that capacity. So we have that map in the report that Fung briefly showed, which breaks down the share of offshore wind, if we are to meet net zero emissions by the middle of the century, into a regional breakdown. And that's led by Asia, followed by Europe, and then North America, Latin America, and then smaller shares for the Pacific and Africa and the Middle East. It's worth studying that graph because it shows you that even under the current policies and announced targets, from the EU's offshore renewable strategy to the Biden administration's 2050 target, there is still a huge gap to close, which means that right now, no region in the world is in the last mile or is on track in terms of its offshore wind ambitions and current plans to get us to a 1.5 degree scenario. But I think what has been said in the last question round is certainly true about the pandemic presenting us with this kind of moment of global awakening or global recognition. And we're now starting to see that renewables like offshore wind are not just going to be our kind of off-ramp from global warming, but also our on-ramp for sustainable economic growth. And I think that offshore wind delivers on both fronts so fantastically in terms of emissions mitigation potential and job creation and so on. So I'm still hopeful that we can get there. We can get closer to closing that gap.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joyce. And let's hope we can find a good program that can help accelerate offshore wind in the future. So over to you, Mark. Siemens Gamesa, as the leading OEM in the turbine manufacturing space for offshore wind, what's your roles and responsibilities in accelerating this growth, and what do you see as some of the key challenges for Siemens Gamesa?
Yeah, we've talked about this tremendous growth to come, and that of course is one topic that requires from us is to keep up with the capacities and be prepared for that and plan for that. And that also leads to the challenge in this, because and that's not only of relevance for us, but for also any other OEM that requires a continuous build out, no bumps, no stops, but something which continues, because neither can you go from 0 to 100, nor can you have wellies and then boost cycles again. Yeah, the unfortunate example for that is Germany, which had a tremendous development in the beginning and then going into full brakes. And the impact of that you can see if you go to the coast cities here in Germany, because the areas where there was a lot of development 10, 8, 7 years ago, that has come a little bit to a standstill. And something like this needs to be avoided in any other region that really bets on offshore wind and offshore wind development. So task for us is to focus on a careful capacity build up and prepare to also deliver on those ambitious targets. But it requires a policy framework which also allows for that.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Aaron, in terms of floating wind, what's some of the key challenges for you, and how do you see Principal Power contributing to meeting the net zero target?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that floating offshore wind has certainly a role to play here. Citing the statistic that is often used for this, the International Renewable Energy Agency does show that basically offshore wind alone could power the planet Earth 18 times over, right? And 80% of this resource is in deep waters, which start to pose challenges for fixed foundations. Because the shallow water resource is not evenly distributed among all countries, that means that offshore wind so far has been limited to regional markets, generally Northern Europe, China, the US East Coast, that do have those significant shallow water areas. And by freeing developers from the constraints of water depth, floating offshore wind has the potential to really enable any coastal nation to tap into offshore wind as a whole. So it really expands the pie for everybody, and can be a just major source of local domestic renewable energy, helping people to meet targets for climate, energy independence, economic development, etc. So this is what we're seeing now, is that's really allowing offshore wind to go global. We're seeing developments in Japan and Korea. We're seeing developments on the Pacific coast, the West Coast, and the Mediterranean basin. And we see that as just another tool in the toolbox of policymakers as they try to develop large-scale renewables. And then the commercialization of alternative fuels, if you can combine those with offshore wind or floating offshore wind, really expands the potential further. So we're working with partners, ERM and Tractebel, on a project in Scotland that aims to develop a platform that can combine a floating wind turbine and hydrogen production on the same platform to basically be able to export clean hydrogen to the grid instead of electricity, which is something I think Siemens Gamesa is doing similarly. And right now, I guess the message that I have is that the technology is ready, right? We have now fully proven this technology. It's compatible with the largest wind turbines. It's ready for the harshest environments. And we believe that it stands ready to contribute to the net zero targets today. The main challenges that we have really right now are that policy and regulatory developments have been quite slow. The industry is not getting access to sites to develop and push quickly enough. And I really emphasize Mark's point that we need stability and sustainability for this industry. We can't just jump in fits and starts. And to some degree, the diversification of markets will help to bring a degree of stability. But if governments want to really unlock the full potential of their economic developments, then you also need to have within market continuity. So I think those are our messages.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. That's very insightful. So Lohit, for DuPont, how are you guys going to contribute to the race to net zero, and what do you see as some of the challenges for DuPont in the short to medium term?
Yeah, so coming from a materials supplier kind of a background, I think we have an ambitious target. The net zero is an ambitious target, and even if we look at the regular targets, we are at 35 gigawatt, aiming to be 270 gigawatt. So that's almost 8x growth. So the number one challenge for a material supplier like us, and the contribution we can make, is to continue to increase our capacities in tandem with the market growth. That's number one. And it's not only about increasing the capacities, but our ability to scale up the global supply chain, ability to provide the same level of service, same level of quality, same level of materials to across the globe to anybody and everybody. And in a way also support the localization, which is also kind of a trend in the industry, right? Also, I think this is an area of the material science is an area of intense innovation. The kind of materials required to be able to produce the next gen technologies, increase the productivity at the equipment manufacturers, increasing the throughput of the equipment manufacturers. These materials cannot be compromised on the safety of the workers who are using these materials, and also the materials which can deliver more for less. So can we enable materials which can reduce the size and the weight of the components? Can we deliver materials which can facilitate life extensions? And these are the areas of innovation which all the material science companies, including us, are working on. It is also about working with and Aaron talked about it, working with the policymakers, working with the standard bodies, because these materials have to have a certain pass through the certain standards and the various international standards. So working with the standard bodies to set up what is the evaluation criteria, what are the test plans, etc. for these materials, and working as well as educating the industry about these new materials. And the foremost, these materials, as we develop these materials, as we plan for net zero, we cannot forget that these materials have to contribute to the sustainability. The concept of the circularity of the material have to be embedded into the design thinking when you kind of develop these materials. So in all, I think it's about developing that ecosystem to deliver. And I think you also talked about the ecosystem. So developing and delivering that ecosystem of sustainable material capabilities which can support the industry as the industry grows by leaps and bounds. So that's what we're doing, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lohit. So Mark, again, you guys just announced the world's first recyclable blade with your resin. Maybe this is a good opportunity for you to jump in and talk about some of the sustainability and how Siemens view sustainability. I know you also touched on that a little bit in your opening with the health and safety aspect as well, but it'd be interested to hear a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely picking up what was just said. This is sustainability is a must. I mean, we see also countries. I mean, first of all, the European Union with the legislation is also going this direction. Some countries like France are even pushing that early ahead. So that is a must. And I mean, we are working in that industry that serves a good purpose, and also our product needs to follow those rules. A large part of it is already recyclable, but so far the blades have been a topic, and we were working quite extensively on this to find a way on how to get that also into the equation. And hence we are very, very happy that we now could launch this, and also have first customers who pick that recyclable blade up. And it is exactly as the colleague from DuPont described. I mean, it's not just finding a solution, also the material properties, of course, still need to be somehow in the same class, but because it is so hard to recycle that blade, because we want to have it stiff and that it lasts 25 years and so on, which comes with the problem that you cannot recycle it thereafter. But now this is feasible, but this really requires deeply going into material science and chemical. Sometimes when I was trying to inform myself on the status on this, I thought I'm back in school, because I haven't seen so many chemical formulas for quite some time. in particular not in a company that build wind turbines, but there you see also what's happening, because we take everything in wind power, in particular in offshore wind power, to the edge. We need to reach out to other disciplines, and material science is clearly a topic which we need to get closer, because otherwise we will not take it to the edge. It's required to get sustainable.
Thanks, Mark. Aaron, what about Principal Power? Are you also up to your eyeballs in chemical formula, or do you have a material science approach? What's Principal Power doing in relation to sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our focus in terms of sustainability right now is really to make sure that that our systems are as low impact as possible on the environment. I think, we're a company that was really founded by environmentalists, and what we see one of the major advantages of floating wind is that you have the flexibility to basically deploy these systems in areas where they can have low impact. You don't have to kind of fight over areas that are sensitive because they're shallow water or something like this. So there's a big focus on making sure that we're siting in the right areas. And I think that as we do that, one of our most interesting projects is in the French Mediterranean Sea. It'll be the first floating wind project to be located in a natural protected area. And in that project, we're doing some really exciting research to study how the wind float can act as an artificial reef and provide shelter and refuge habitat for a variety of species. So the initial results that we're getting are quite promising. And what we're hoping is that we can demonstrate that floating wind can even be a tool to increase biodiversity and help our oceans to recover.
Yeah, fantastic. That's I mean, all of this impact on the marine life, and also I guess how we develop marine spatial planning in the future, that's going to be really important. I can see that we are rapidly running out of time. So for those people, I promised a very interactive question and answer session, and unfortunately we haven't got to any of the questions or given opportunity to answer. But what I will promise that for those that have sent a question through to us, we will answer that question on a bilateral basis and get back to you with an answer soon after the webinar. I would like to ask each of the panelists for a concluding remark now. So first of all, Joyce, if you want to wrap up, what's your takeaway from today's webinar?
Sure, I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and interesting to see the flow of questions coming in as well, which are covering all sorts of topics from supply chain bottlenecks, vessel availability, decarbonizing the upstream segments of the wind value chain through materials like green steel. These challenges and others, including finance challenges, infrastructure challenges, we do review in our report. I would say the unifying message is around collaboration here, that we're pushing for governments to work with industry and other stakeholders, science partners that have been mentioned, to cooperate on creating these enabling policy frameworks, other issues like access to relevant marine data, accelerating allocation of seabed and permitting, apologies about the church bells in my background, build out of transmission, and integrated ocean planning. Offshore wind is not a next year industry. We need these frameworks and the right signals to be put in head 10 years ahead of time for large-scale offshore wind to materialize. Thanks.
Yeah, well done, Joyce, and well done for pushing through the bells. There's nothing like a gentle reminder that time is in fact up. So Mark, if we hand over to you now to quickly say Siemens Gamesia's closing remarks.
I think we are happy to continue to lead the offshore revolution. This report underlines the enormous potential. The zero bits, also the latest announcement in Germany, shows how independent of subsidies to a certain degree the industry has become. But I'd like to stress again that we are not independent from policy support, which is very important. Also, Aaron has mentioned that, and we didn't discuss this here. But this local content topic is something which requires further discussion and needs to be carefully investigated.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's a real key issue. Maybe there's a whole webinar dedicated to local content issues in the future, Mark. Aaron, over to you for Principal Power's final remarks.
Sure. No, I think the opportunity for the industry, fixed and floating, is enormous. I think policymakers have one of the best tools here to reach their net zero target. You can deploy these projects at a very large scale. You can deploy them far from shore. You can deploy them with low environmental impact, and they have excellent characteristics to complement a low carbon energy mix. And I think that that's just something that does require careful consideration about the policy and regulatory investments that are required to make this industry happen. We see for floating wind that there are tremendous challenges in achieving the targets that we're setting forth. Those are related to really building up supply chains in areas that either haven't historically had a big marine industries or have marine industries that haven't been active with new builds for quite some time. We see that turning that vision into reality is going to require really coordinated effort along the developers, supply chain, technology providers like ourselves, and policymakers as well. And we've included in the report a case study on industrialization so that people can see a bit our vision about the challenges and how we overcome them. So encourage you to check it out. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaron. So Lohit, over to you for DuPont's final remarks.
Thanks, Stuart. And we are out of time, so I'll keep it very, very short. So my final thoughts would be the task is too big to be accomplished alone. So the key word here is collaboration. And I think Joyce and everybody talked about it. How do we collaborate across the industry, across the value chains, across the stakeholders to really deliver solutions which are sustainable, cost effective, and fast? So I think that to me is the key. That how do we continue to engage and collaborate with all the industry stakeholders? So the future is bright, but that bright future would really need extremely high levels of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you everyone very much for joining today's webinar. And as I mentioned, that we will be getting back to everyone that's asked questions throughout the course of the webinar in due course. For those people that are still having trouble downloading the report, please be patient. We'll be including a link to the report in the chat function. I also need to do a little bit of advertising. We were meant to actually do a sort of wrapper or sort of touch on some of the markets where we saw offshore wind developing, and DWeck and the Japan Wind Association are having an event in Japan at the end of this month. And so please, if you're in Japan, make sure you get along to the JWPA's and DWeck's event. It's going to be fantastic. And I mean, DWeck has done a fair bit of work with the JWPA in Japan to help sort of unlock or to get some nice targets or ambitious targets in Japan. So we look forward to seeing you guys, if you're in Japan, in person at this meeting. Otherwise, that concludes our session for today. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists once again. So thank you, Joyce Lee, thank you, Mark Becker, thank you, Aaron Smith, and thank you, Lohit Sanghi, for your participation today, and for Fung and Ben, thank you also for your contribution. And thank you all you for your participation and watching today's webinar. Until next time, see you later.
Thank
you, Stuart, for coordinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.